let's let's make it happen. Um, okay. And please, I don't want you to be quiet when I pause and ask whether I want to hear your thoughts. Um, just be brief on the point, and then we move on. You know. Okay, let me start recording here, and let me get my thoughts together. Alrighty. Shabbat shalom to those on Facebook. I keep saying Facebook. Shabbat shalom to those on YouTube. Thank you for joining us. You are coming into almost part 3 of our series, The Rivers of Babylon. We're looking at part 2 of Establishment of the Monarchy. Because we are broadcasting on YouTube and Facebook and social media, I want to read this disclaimer because it's important. Those in the class, I don't need to read this to them, but since you are joining us as guests on social media, I want this to be clear. The lecture that you're going to hear is not seeking to impose any particular theological perspective, but to provide information and raise questions that should be relevant to any student, regardless of faith commitment. The information is largely drawn from the history, archaeology, and literature of the ancient Near East. Our interest today in the Hebrew Bible will be centered on the culture, the history, the literature, and the religious thought of ancient Israel in all of its diversity, rather than questions of faith and theology. Our approach today is going to be an academic one. If you agree and you're comfortable, you can proceed to listen on. Last week, we ended brilliantly with a statement from Madam Pamela Jean. Brilliant statement. I want to pick up from where we stopped, that statement, and use that as my starting point to look at David, King David, critically. There is a lot of things that the text tells us about David, but we don't necessarily see it because he's our favorite person. And I want to point these things out to you because they're extremely, extremely important. I'm going to be saying things about David that you may not like because you like him so much. I'm going to be revealing some things, not from my head, but from the text, from history, that may be problematic to some of us. I do understand. But like I said, this is an academic setting and not a religious one. So I think it's appropriate to look at the text this way. It's good to hear it from me, one of you, rather than to hear from somebody who is opposing you because he's not part of the Hebrew community. So I'll do my best to be candid and not be biased. I think I do that quite well. We have King David, David Hamalek. And he sets certain standards which shows him to be a man of strength. But when we read carefully, he seems to be inconsistent. And it may portray the redactors of the text, the editors of the text, the writers of the text, trying to clean certain things up. And that is what I'm trying to demonstrate today. Let's start with 2 Samuel, the incident with Bathsheba. I'm going to read from verses 16. and then I'll pose some questions. And David besought Elohim on behalf of the child. This is the child that came about through his um, um, intercourse with Bathsheba. And David fasted a fast, and he came in and slept, lying on the ground. And the elders of his house stood over him to praise him from the ground. Sorry, to raise him from the ground. But he would not, neither did he eat bread with them. And it came to pass on the seventh day that the child died. And the servants of David feared to tell him that his child was dead. For they said, Behold, while the child was yet alive, we spoke to him, and he did not hearken to our voices. How then shall we tell him that the child is dead, so that he do himself harm? And David saw that his servants were whispering, and he understood that the child was dead. And David said to his servant, Is the child dead? And they said, He is dead. And David got up from the ground and washed and anointed himself and changed his clothes. And he came to the house of Yudhevavhe and kneeled. And he came to his house, and he asked that they set bread before him, and he ate. So here we see that David is showing great mastery when it comes to mourning. And Madam Pamela put it so beautiful last week. If you did not hear the ending of the class, go listen to it beautifully. She explained that sometimes we have to know how to mourn. Are we mourning for the person who's departed? Or are we mourning? Or are we trying to figure out how we can move on? I mean, she said it beautifully, beautifully, and I agree 100%. This is the picture that 2 Samuel 12 paints about David. You know, the child is dead. You're crying, you're mourning will not bring the child back. So he gets up, he dresses up, he breaks his fast, he goes to eat, which is not actually normal. Culturally, he has to mourn. Okay. But, I mean, it's remarkable coming from the understanding that you cannot do anything about it. Move on with your life. Okay. His servants are actually disturbed about it because they believe in, I mean, you have to mourn for the child who just passed, 21. And his servant said to him, What is this thing that you have done? For the live child you fasted and wept, but when the child died, you got up and ate bread? No. I mean, they are expecting him to maybe fast some more, maybe 30 days, 40 days, who knows? 22. And he said, While the child was yet alive, I fasted and wept. For I said, Who knows? Perhaps Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh will be gracious to me, and the child will live. But now that he is dead, why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he will not return to me. Meaning that if I fast, and I'm going to die, and I'm going to join the person, across the river. So, why fast? Why mourn? So this portrays David, a man of strength. It portrays David as, like the text says, I fasted and wept when the child was alive. For I said, perhaps Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh will be gracious to me. Why is that inconsistent? Did David mourn when Absalom died? There'll be a question. He mourned bitterly. What about Saul and Jonathan? He mourned bitterly. He wrote a song, a psalm. So why is it that when it comes to this child, he doesn't see the need for mourning after the child's death? Mr. Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is it because of his relationship with Bathsheba? So this first child that he had could be like getting rid of what he committed with Bathsheba when her husband was away.
Correct. What would have happened if the child did not die? It was going to be a stigma. Anytime they saw the child, it would remember or bring memory of the illegal relationship. So was it convenient for David that this child died?
Well, Moray, could you actually say that he was possibly in mourning because he was fasting before the death of the child?
He was, yes. So he was in mourning, correct? Because he was fasting. He would don sackcloth, he wouldn't eat. Yes. But he doesn't do that after the death of the child. But we see him do that with the death of other children, and even sometimes his enemies. So we don't see the consistency. Why is it that this child is not mourned? Put that in your spirit. I'm not going to give an answer yet, but I want to use this as my springboard to really have us sit back and say, wait a second, let us examine this. I call him our lover boy because we love him so much. But has our love for him made it impossible for us to really read the text and ask the necessary questions? Let's begin our class. How did King Saul and David meet? What is the discovery narrative of David? One narrative is that he was picked out because of his skill as a musician. This is how they met. This is one tradition. Let's read it. 1 Samuel 16. And Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers, and a spirit of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh passed over David from that day forth, and Samuel arose and went to Ramah, and the spirit of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh frightened him. And Saul's servant said to him, Behold now, an evil spirit of Elohim is frightening you. Let our Lord say, let them seek a man who knows how to play on the harp, and it will be that when the evil spirit of Elohim is upon you, he will play with his hand, and it will be good for you. And Saul said to his servant, Provide me now with a man who plays well, and you shall bring him to me. And one of the young men answered and said, Behold, I saw a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, who knows how to play, a mighty man of valor, and a warrior, and prudent in affairs, and a handsome man, and Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh is with him. So we're getting a lot of information from this narrative. We're going to draw out all the information, and then we're going to look at them one after the other. And Saul sent messengers to Jesse And he said, "Send me David your son, who is with the sheep." And Jesse took a donkey laden with bread, and an earthenware jug of wine, and a kid, and he sent them with David his son to Saul. And David came to Saul and stood before him, and he loved him very much, and he was his weapon bearer. And Saul sent to Jesse, saying, "Let David stand before me now, for he has found favor in my eyes." This is the first narrative. This is how they met. This is how David gets into the court of Saul as a musician. Okay, now there's a second tradition telling us about how they met, and it's contrary to what we've just read. Let's read that tradition. 1 Samuel 17. The narrative with Goliath, David and Goliath. And David stretched his hand into the bag and took a stone therefrom and slung it. And he hit the Philistine in his forehead, and the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. And David overpowered the Philistine with a slingshot and with a stone, and he smote the Philistine and slew him. And no sword was in David's hand. And David ran and stood up to the Philistine, and he took his sword and drew it from its sheath and slew him, and with it severed his head. And the Philistines saw that their hero had died, and they fled. Awesome. And the men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines until you come to the valley and until the gates of Ekron. And the slain of the Philistines fell on the road of Sharaim and up to Gath and up to Ekron. And the children of Israel returned from pursuing the Philistines and plundered their camps. And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, and his weapons he put it in his tent. Okay, I'll leave that alone. And when Saul saw David going out towards the Philistine, he said to Abner, the general of his army, "Whose son is this youth, Abner?" And Abner said, "By your life, O king, I know not." And the king said, "You asked whose son this youth is." So, yeah. And as David returned from slaying the Philistine, Abner called him and brought him before Saul, and the Philistine's head was in his hand. And Saul said to him, "Whose son are you, young man?" And David said, "The son of your bondsman, Jesse, the Bethlehemite." So we have two accounts of how they met. One says that they met because Saul needed a musician, and the other tradition said they met at the battle with Goliath. So these are two traditions how these men met. Any questions so far before we move on? Contributions?
Rabbi, these traditions are very different, though.
They are, yes. They are very different, yes. So we have the A tradition and the B tradition. That's how I would name it here for it to make sense.
It's amazing, man. I've been reading this book for so long, and I've never noticed that there were two different ways that they met. I've always I guess I just overlooked Samuel 16 because I've always considered or thought that this is how they met. At war, when David's father sent him down to go check on his brothers, I believe. That's how the earlier part of chapter 17 starts.
Correct.
And that's how they met at war. Wow. I need to reread this book.
So what I do in my commentary of the book of Samuel, which is going to be out this week, I'm waiting for the author copy so that I can verify that everything is solid. Thanks to Madame Marie, she does a great job with these books. In that book, I'll be honest. I'll be honest. In that book, I struggled in the commentary on the book of Samuel. I struggled writing it because I was writing not from an necessarily a historical point of view. It was written from a point of view uh, somewhat theological, but I couldn't do theology all the way. Sometimes I had to concede and say, no, I cannot, I don't know how to reconcile. Sometimes I try to reconcile it. And I think I conceded with this here. I conceded, and I think I explained as well that maybe you want to read chapter 17 before chapter 16. I try to make sense out of it coming from that that level. So when you get the book, you would see how I sometimes weave through, history, geography, all of that stuff. It was a difficult book because I couldn't really write it like I'm teaching it because it wasn't the goal, you know. So yes, some people try to make it fit. It's difficult to make it fit, but it's the fact is that it's two different traditions. Two different traditions. Go ahead, Mr. Jason.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, given how things were written in, I mean, it would make sense to put the traditions together like this. But I'm thinking of it from a outside lens, like the people who are putting it into the text may not have been thinking of it as like a theological lens, like how they put it together.
Correct. Correct. Yes. Yes. It's the person writing. What is he writing? What is he trying to put across? And that's how I wrote the commentary. But then what we're doing now is we're looking at it academically. We're looking at historical data. We're looking at the text. Because you see, no matter how, even when you're doing theology, you give us so much information that we can decipher what is going on, and that's what we're going to do today. Okay, awesome. Any other contributions before I move on? Or questions?
Rabbi,
Madam Alita.
perhaps they weren't concerned as much about the order in which a thing went, just presenting what it was that they needed to present, not in order. We're always going in order. We're the modern day 2021 people. We want everything to go 1, 2, 3, ABC, do, re, mi. But perhaps at this time when they were writing, it isn't about the accuracy or the order of a thing. It's about presenting the thing, both stories, presenting both stories
Yep.
as simultaneously. They don't necessarily have to go in an order. Because there's no way that Saul didn't know who David was. He'd been playing, if he had been playing for him, or you know who's coming in there, that close to the king,
and he's your armor bearer.
Yeah, and hey, and so you know this guy, and then now in the second part you're asking, well, who in the world are you? Either you have Alzheimer's real bad, or you would just let any random person come in. So I don't think that they were concerned about what came first, the chicken or the egg, but I do think that they were concerned about the content, making sure that everybody understood all of what needed to be told about David and the beginnings of David and Saul.
I agree.
Thanks.
Rabbi, could I add to what Madam Alita was saying? This makes perfect sense to what you're saying, Madam Alita. And this is why I think that like with the text, they wasn't trying to prove a theological point. Because if they're trying to prove a theological point, you want stuff to flow. You wouldn't add 2 or 3 different narratives of the same story into the text. It seems like they're just trying to preserve the story of David and the different traditions in which they had it in.
Rabbi, I got a question though. H.P. Harden made a great point though. In the beginning of 17, when David showed up, didn't Saul have a conversation with him?
Yes, he did have a conversation.
Yeah, when he was offering him the armor,
The
and
armor,
he was like, "Yo, this is
correct.
heavy. You just get." So, and didn't David introduce himself at that point as well, where he told him like, "Look, I'm a shepherd for my father. I've been used to doing this from fighting bears or whatever." I forgot the exact details, but I'm almost positive there was an introduction there as well too, before he got to the point of slaying Goliath.
Yes. So yeah, they met, and then he um, gave him his armor, his sword, and he said no. Correct. There was an introduction there, but the conversation wasn't about his origins, where he's from, who his father was. It's somebody who wants to go fight. So that is the, like we said, two traditions. You have the A and the B. That's how I'm naming it for clarity. So yes, so that is all part of the one tradition, how they met. It was on the battleground. The other one was when he needed someone to play music for him.
I just have a quick comment.
Yes, Ernest.
Historically, it just doesn't. Historically, it's just a problem on how they met. So the question is, which one is historically correct?
Yeah, that is a.
Yeah, historically, how can story is correct if you're looking at it historically? I think both can't be correct. Either one is right, one is wrong, or neither are right.
Correct. So historically, we would focus on the idea that they met. Um, there was a historical meeting. How they met, there's two traditions of it. So I think the main focus will be that they did meet. Why do we have two different narratives of how they met? Then you go into the realms of theology. It depends on the theology of either the writers, the editors, the redactors, or the people putting the text together, and then the tradition that was set in stone that this is how they met. But there is an agenda, so now you have to give us another tradition of how they met because you're trying to clean some things up, which I'm going to start pointing out. No. Okay, let's move on. So we just read the two narratives or the two traditions of how these two individuals met. We get a lot of details, and I want to point those details out and then we tackle them. We get some very important details about David. His name is David. That's one. His father is Jesse. He is from Bethlehem. Let's tackle these one after the other. So the person we're looking at today is David. We know his father's name. We know where he's from. We know his name. So what is the meaning of the name David? It's uncertain. We really don't know what the meaning of the name is. Unless somebody has heard the meaning somewhere. But it's quite uncertain. I would deal with this some other time. I would propose or I would show you some of the meanings that have been proposed and I would show you why it is difficult. Um, it's a difficult topic, why the scholars don't agree. Yes, beloved. Beloved is is one of them. When you come to our tradition, Devi, showing that he's the last born. Yes, but I'll leave that for another topic. We know his father's name. His father is Jesse. What does his name mean? Now, this is interesting. Originally, this name is not complete. we're missing a component of the name. Originally, Jesse meant there is plus a divine name. So there is maybe Yud He Vav He. There is maybe El. We've lost the divine name that is attached to it. No source preserves the divine name associated with the name Jesse. There is, that's what the name means. But there is what? It would usually say there is Yah, there is Elohim, there is Baal, there is Asheroth, there is, but we don't have the divine name that is attached to it. No source preserves it. So it may have been a compound name, compounded with Yud He Vav He, or with the name of some other god, or with an epithet, such as Baal. We don't have it. If I ask you to guess, though, if I ask you to take a guess, what divine name would you put there? Some are saying L in the chat. Okay. What divine name would you put there? Mr. Mark says Yud He Vav He.
Yeah, at this point it would be yeah, no. I mean, we're already out of Egypt, so it'd be just yeah.
Okay.
When don't they normally lose a letter when they transcribe or they go from one language to the other? That's the reason why I thought it would be Giselle or Giselle as
Correct.
opposed to anything else.
Correct. You're correct. So with what you've said, the name David has an H, DDH. There's an H behind it. We don't know what that H is. We've just preserved the weed. We don't know that H. Maybe it would also be a divine name back attached to the name, but we don't have it. I think on the Mishnah Stili, where it talks about the house of David, is written with an H behind the D. So we don't know. We don't know. Just like the father Jesse, we don't know. That's why I'm asking you to guess. So Mr. D is correct. You may have lost something there. But if you had to guess, I'm not surprised that everyone is going for either L or Yud He Vav He. And as Mr. David said, it's after the covenant, correct? So it has to be Yud He Vav He. Not necessarily. I believe is the Jebusite God. I believe Jesse's name, there is, the divine name there will be the name of one of the Jebusites' God. Now you'd ask, why, Rabbi? The text says that he's a Bethlehemite. He's from Bethlehem. Well, Bethlehem was a city in Jebus. Bethlehem was a Jebusite city. It was a vassal city to Jerusalem. It was a Jebusite city and not a city of Israel. This is where everything changes. This is where you have to listen carefully. The Jebusites worshipped El Elyon and then their patron deity was Salim. Salim was the chief god of the Jebusites. You should know that Jerusalem had its name before David conquered it. The city Jerusalem was in existence before David conquered it. You remember the Amaah letters? We talked about the Amaah letters. The letters from Canaan that frequently complained about groups who were causing turmoil in Canaan and challenging Egyptian authority. These were the troublemakers who famously called the Habiru or Apiru. Okay. On the Amaah letters, Jerusalem is called Jerusalem. I repeat that. On the Amaah letters, this city that came to be called Jerusalem is called Jerusalem. Jerusalem, however I want to pronounce it. What does Jerusalem or Jerusalem mean? It means the foundation or the cornerstone of the god of the Jebusite city, Salim. Don't forget this. Extremely important. When we look at David, based on this historical data, based on what the text is telling us, David's mother came from Moab and his father from a Jebusite city called Bethlehem. I repeat that again. Our beloved David, his mother came from Moab. We see that in the book of Ruth. His father from Bethlehem, which was a Jebusite city, not an Israelite city. Mr. David is asking, so he is not Israel? We would find out. There's a lot in the text that we miss. Okay, now look at the name of the god. Salim. SLM. Those are the consonants. Salim. SLM. Salim. Jerusalem. Foundations, the cornerstone of the god. Alrighty. You can tell a lot about a person by the name that he gives his children. It tells you which gods he worships. It tells you which gods he has allegiance to. What name does David give his children? Second Samuel 12. David consoled his wife Bathsheba. He went to her and lay with her. She bore a son and she named him Solomon, Shlomo. Let's say it in Hebrew. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh favored him, and he sent a message through the prophet Nathan, and he was named Jedidiah at the instance of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Okay, Why do we have a second name, a throne name for Solomon? Why does the mother name him Shlomo, and then Nathan the prophet comes and names him Jedidiah as a throne name? Well, because Shlomo is named after the Jebusite god Shalim. So Nathan comes into the picture and gives him a name that has Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh in it. That is his throne name. He's never called that. He's always called Shlomo. Man, Braba, you're pushing it. You're pushing it. Give us another evidence. Sure, no problem. Let's go to his son Absalom. This happened sometime afterwards. Absalom, son of David. What does Absalom mean? It means my father is Salim, the Jebusite patron deity. Salim. Salim doesn't mean peace. It has the same consonants as peace in Hebrew, shalom. That's where you get confused. If you come to the text already believing that Jerusalem was an Israelite city, Bethlehem was an Israelite city, yes, you would interpret it as such, but that wasn't the case. It was a Jebusite city first. So there was a need for Nathan to come up with a name that has Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh in it for Shlomo. Ha. Let's go on and then I'll pause and ask questions. Let's give you some more data. The earliest reference of Bethlehem is also on the Amaah letters. This is what it reads. But now, even a town of the land of Jerusalem, Beit Lami. I repeat that. Beit Lami. That is the name of the place. What you call Bethlehem is Beit Lami. We have it on the Amaah letters. Beit is house of. Lami is Lehem. What is Lehem? It was, so Lamu was the Akkadian god of fertility. But the Canaanites worshipped him as Lehem. It means the house of the god Lehem. I repeat that. Before it became Beit, house, Lehem, bread in Hebrew, the name was Beit Lami. The language is important. Again, if you come to the text thinking that the place was called such all the time, you will miss this. This place was called such before it became called Bethlehem or Jerusalem in Hebrew. Lamu was the Akkadian god of fertility. The Canaanites worshipped him as Lehem. So what you have here is that the pronunciation of this place, the name has remained the same for 3,500 years, however you want to put it. But the meaning has changed, even though it means the same thing. Beit Lami is the house of the god Lahem. Interestingly enough, Beit Lahem in Hebrew means the house of bread. That is where the confusion is. So you would think from the onset it was an Israelite city. Not at all. I'll repeat it again. The pronunciation of the name of the place remained essentially the same for 3,500 years, but has meant different things based on the people who have occupied it. Even though the name has been Beit Lami, the house of the god Lehem, in Hebrew, Bethlehem means the house of bread. So, what am I pointing out? I'm going to explain it in the next slide. But I'll pause here first. We are looking at the origins of King David based on what history tells us, based on what the text itself is telling us. And then we are going to make our own conclusions. I'm not going to make that conclusions for you, but I'm presenting you with the data, and then you would have to make that decision yourself. I will pause here and take some questions, contributions, comments.
I have a question. If you, let's start this way. If the writers are writing and it's later and to their audience in the South, they would be writing to the Hebrew audience and it would be the house of bread. But if it's written earlier, then it would be the God of what you were referring to. So this all basically comes down to who you believe the audience is or when you believe it was written.
Yes, so the people writing it, they're translating Bethlehem as house of bread, but they're conceding that it's a Jebusite city. Their translation is Bethlehem, house of bread, Jerusalem, city of peace, or foundations of peace. That is what they are translating it as, correct? But in the text itself, they concede that it was a Jebusite city and David had to take it, conquer it. So based on that data that they've given us, that it was a Jebusite city, it did not belong to Israel, David had to conquer it, and the information we have outside of the text, extra biblical data, historical data, which corroborates what the text is saying, we know that under the Jebusites, Bethlehem was still there, but it did not mean house of bread. Jerusalem was there. It did not mean what it came to mean after the Hebrews took it. So yes, they're not saying it's Beit Lami, but they are conceding that and they are accepting that it was a Jebusite city. Any other comments? Don't be shy. Speak up.
Rabbi, come on, man. It's too early in the morning for this, man. So, why?
Say it again, sorry?
No, I'm trying to gather my thoughts together. Why is but David, the script? Oh my God! All right, the text paints David that he pays homage to Yah every chance he gets. But if we're looking at it from this angle, he's also paying respect to the Jebusite gods every chance he gets.
Correct, because that's his origins.
But he is Israel, though, right? We're not gonna say
No,
that
we have
he's
to.
Biden.
Well, we have to let the text speak. So the question that I'll ask is David an Israelite by convenience? That's the question that I would pose. Is he an Israelite by
Rabbi.
convenience?
It's too early in the morning, man.
Rabbi, yo. I read this scripture many times and never ever pieced that together. This is amazing. But you are correct when you look at how they name their children. You name your children according to your deity,
Okay.
like who you believe. So, like, my son name is Abiyah. My oldest son name is Jeriel,
Yes.
right? And I'm thinking, like, yo, David really named his kids after the god Salim. Like, you never think of it because it's Absalom. Like, you don't piece the consonants together like that. But when you think about it, it's like he still held ties to his deity. So the question that I would have is, how did he become Israel? How did he become an Israelite? That's what I want to know, because there's some way they piece this together beautifully in the text, but how?
Correct.
But
We'll get there.
Rabbi, you said by convenience. What do you mean? You gotta
Yes,
switch
so
that up or
correct.
explain that.
Politically, was it a political move? That's what I mean. Did he become an Israelite by convenience, meaning that was it political? And it's not today's class, it's next week's class. Today, I'm just trying to build a foundation to show that, hey, this is the historical fact. Can we point it out in the text? And we're going to do that right now.
And when you say political, you mean you mean he wasn't born that way? It was just necessary to make him that?
Correct. That's
So
what I mean. Yes.
Oh, come on, man. Come on, man.
Rabbi, there's a question in the chat. There's a question in the chat, and I think it's important.
Which
See if I
one?
can
The
answer it.
YouTube or
Our chat.
our
on
chat?
here.
Okay.
Adrian said, "Is this parallel to Abraham's conversion? Like, you know how Abraham was with a different deity, but then he converted over."
Yes,
Is
it
that-
could be.
that
Yes.
is the distinction between okay.
Yes, it could be Mr. Adrian. I would if I don't want to state emphatically so you take my word for it, but if one makes the decision, if one comes based on their facts, the data that I'm going to present, if one determines that okay, he was not Israelite, then there would have been a conversion. Then we'll have to talk about ethnicity in the Asian Near East. When we say someone was an Israelite, what did we mean by that? Could anybody become an Israelite even if they were not born Israel? That would be next week's class. Very good, very good.
For this week, I like that point of view. But could this be applied to the wife as opposed to David? Because that's her background.
Correct. Whose background? Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Bathsheba, though the wife is Israel. Bathsheba is Israel. But she gives the name based on the belief system of the husband. So she's the one giving the name. Usually it's the women who would give the name. But she's called Shlomo. David doesn't protest. It's Nathan that comes and gives him a throne name, Jedidiah. But he's never addressed as that. So now, if the questions are done, now we have to look at Saul. Sometimes we think Saul is out of his mind, but does Saul know something that we have failed to realize in the text? Let's move on. 1 Samuel 16 and 17 addresses Jesse as the Bethlehemite. Don't forget that. He's not called Jesse the Judean, meaning that he comes from the tribe of Judah, he's called Jesse the Bethlehemite. Now, Saul has an issue with David. David is on the run. They were supposed to meet at the full moon to have a meal. That is what it looks like the tradition was at that time. David doesn't show up. Saul is pissed off already. Saul was thinking that David would show up that day so that he could arrest him and have him killed. This is what we read, 1 Samuel 20. David hid in the field. The new moon came, and the king sat down to partake of the meal. When the king took his usual place on the seat by the wall, Jonathan rose and Abner sat down at Saul's side, but David's place remained vacant. That day, however, Saul said nothing. It's accidental, he thought. He must be unclean and not yet cleansed. But on the day after the new moon, the second day, David's place was vacant again. So Saul said to his son Jonathan, pay attention to the man's word. Why didn't the son of Jesse come to the meal yesterday or today? Jonathan answered Saul, David begged leave of me to go to Bethlehem. Notice that Saul, in disgust, Saul, in anger, addresses David as the son of Jesse. He's not saying it in a nice way. He's definitely pissed off, angry. Okay, the conversation continued. He said, please, let me go. This is what he's asking permission from Jonathan to permit him to leave. Please, let me go, for we are going to have a family feast in our town, and my brother has summoned me to it. Do me a favor, let me slip away to see my kinsman. That is why he has not come to the king's table. Saul flew in a rage against Jonathan. You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, he shouted. I know that you side with the son of Jesse. He doesn't mention his name. To your shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness. For as long as the son of Jesse lives on earth, neither you nor your kingship will be secure. Now then, have him brought to me, for he is marked for death. Why is Saul addressing David as the son of Jesse here? He's not saying it to be nice. He's questioning his lineage. He's saying it out of resentment.
Rabbi, I think it's similar to like how when it was whoever was taking, was it Abraham taking somebody to Mount Moriah or whatever, but he was like, Eleazar will be my heir, you know, that type, it's that type of same energy, you know.
Oh, okay, correct.
Now, I've got a question. Is Jesse or is David the 10th generation?
David, the 10th generation? I think according to the text, he is. Yes, he's 5 generations from Nashon. That's how they put it. Yes.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking, because if Jesse is the 10th, then unless Jesse really was a Bethlehemite, he should actually be part of Israel by now. But if David is the 10th, then Jesse isn't, and then it makes more sense. You follow what I'm referring to? The 10th generation becomes?
Yes. We have to look at the lineage, but yes, we have to look at the lineage. But yep, maybe you have a point. So yes, any other comment, questions on why?
Yes,
Like why is he
yes.
not addressing him as David, but David he's addressing him as the son of Jesse, and is out of resentment, question his lineage. Please go ahead.
Rabbi, isn't it because there was always some question regarding the validity that David was Jesse's son because of who his mom was, and as a youth, he really never was considered or was never like a part of the family per
Part of
se.
the family. Yes, it could be, but the mom was no Jesse. Uh, um, um, According to the text, the mom is Hebrew because the text is been written when they were
Okay.
when the territory had been conquered already. But historically, at this time, no, it wasn't. It wasn't under Israel. It was under the Jebusites.
Rabbi,
Mr. Jason.
it's peculiar here because Saul says, as long as the son of Jesse
Yes.
lives on earth, neither you nor your kingsmen will be secure. And this is, it came to pass because they were not secure, because the son of Jesse lived. So the thing is, um, this lineage of the son of Jesse, Saul must have knew something that is just not here in the text.
Correct.
But from what's going on here, there's definitely something going on with this this David line. So then the question even becomes, never mind, it's not on time. We'll save that for later. All right.
You have a point here. Saul definitely knows something. We get to find out later. David is not the musician that you think he is. His main strength is that he's a general. He commands an army. He's no joke. When it comes to war, strategy, I mean, this guy is no joke at all. So if there's anyone who can contest those days with the monarchy, it's going to be him. Not only that, he's married into the royal family. He's married into Saul's family. So he's very close to the throne. But Saul is questioning his lineage.
I have a question.
Mr. Jabet.
What is the issue with Jonathan's mother?
Oh, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just he's just insulting. Okay. Yes, Saul is just upset.
Yeah. Okay.
Wait, Rabbi, I got a quick question. Yes. This situation right here that you have on the screen, is that before Samuel came and told Saul that, look, we're gonna take the kingdom from you and give it to somebody else? This was before all of that took place?
No, after. So Saul has already been made known already.
Okay, Saul already told David what time it was that he was going to be the next king here, right?
Samuel had already anointed him. But
okay.
Yes, Samuel had already anointed him as king, correct? According to the narrative, yes.
All right.
Rabbi,
Madam Pamela Jean.
quick question.
Please go ahead.
Isn't David a descendant of Judah and Lot? Ruth was a descendant of Lot, and her
Correct.
husband, his name was a descendant of Judah. So why would his lineage be in question? I understand that they hail from the town of Bethlehem, and the meaning really is that they, it's the town of Salim, or the deity is Salim. But that doesn't make it any more convincing to me that David's lineage is in question when we stop to think that we were spread out all over the place. And the tribe, there were 12 sons, so they had to marry outside of the Israelite community. There were only 12 sons and one daughter, so they married Moabites, they married Jezebites, they married all over the place.
Correct.
But when you talk about the lineage, how do we get to questioning his lineage? That's, if you can help me with that, because I look at who his grandparents and great grandparents and so forth and so forth were. So can you help me there?
Correct. That's a beautiful question, and it's a simple answer. The narrative that you read before you get to the book of Samuel is after the fact. Always remember that. The narrative that we're reading concerning the book of Ruth, etc., where you have the lineage, is after the fact. No. They are questioning David's lineage. So the book of Ruth is going to clarify that. But it's written after the fact. So now you can iron things out. Now you can make a case and say, okay, he's this, he's this, he's this, he's that. He comes from this lineage. But I will show you something that his lineage is missing from the book of Samuel, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, the book of Kings. We don't have a lineage for David. We get it in the book of Chronicles and then Ruth.
I get it. I just know too much information at this point.
Correct.
I need to put myself back.
Yes. Yes.
Awesome. Got it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. You have so much information that is not been written yet. So that can possibly be to a disadvantage. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Let's move on. So this guy here, Saul, is questioning, Mr. Jason, you're correct. Saul is questioning his lineage. Let's move on after Saul. 2 Samuel 20. A scoundrel named Sheba, son of Bichri, a Benjamite, happened to be there. He sounded the horn and proclaimed, this guy's from the north, we have no portion in David, no share in Jesse's son. Again, why is it that when they mention David, they mention his father? This is not Saul mentioning it. Saul is dead and gone. This is the north. They're still referring to him, or they're still bringing up this Jesse's son thing. 1 Kings 12. We see the same thing. He spoke to them in accordance with the advice of the young men and said, my father made, this is Solomon's child speaking, my father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. My father flogged you with whips, but I will flog you with scorpions. The king did not listen to the people, for Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh had brought it about in order to fulfill the promise that Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh had made through Ahijah the Shilonite to Jeroboam son of Nebat. When all of Israel saw that the king had not listened to them, the people answered and said, we have no portion in David, no share in Jesse's son. They bring it up again. The author or the writer also mentions this. This is the narrator. These are the last words of David, the utterance of David, son of Jesse. This is the narrator addressing David as the son of Jesse. The preservation of David's father's name indicates that the historical Jesse possessed maybe means and probably had influence. Possibly his status revoked resentment. The negative emphasis on David's paternity, the son of Jesse, as is used in 2 Samuel, reflects a set of accusations by his opponents to which we no longer enjoy direct access. His opponents are accusing him. One of this accusation could have been that David was the usurper, at least of the crown of Israel. So the invocation of the father's name would indicate his lack of status. Usually when someone is mentioned, when your father is mentioned, is because your father has a certain status in the family, in the community. Maybe a rich person, maybe a well-known person. So the father's name is attached to it. But when we see that the name is mentioned in resentment, when the name is mentioned not in a nice way, it would not mean that. When we come to Saul, or example, Elkanah, this is what we get about Elkanah. In the book of Samuel, there was a man from Ramathaim Zophim, or Ramathaim of the Zophites, in the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, son of Jeroham, son of Elihu, son of Tohu, son of Zup, an Ephraimite, an Ephratite. This is how Elkanah is introduced in the text. How is Saul introduced? 1 Samuel 9. There was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, son of Abdiel, son of Zeror, son of Bechorath, son of Aphiah, a Benjamite, a man of substance. He had a son whose name was Saul. We don't have a lineage for David in the book of 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, the book of Kings, 1 and 2. We don't. The absence of such material about David in the books of Samuel is telling. We don't have a lineage for him. So the tradition at that time will support what I'm presenting today. It wasn't until the book of Ruth and the book of First Chronicles, which is highly theological. It doesn't mention, it cleans up David very well. It doesn't mention Bathsheba's narrative. It's not there in the book of Chronicles. It's like an apologetic work for David. It is not until the book of Ruth that we get a genealogy. Because in David's own time, there wasn't such a genealogy. His lineage is questioned. So if you are writing for David and you're trying to answer these accusations tabled against him, you would want to give us a genealogy in the book of Ruth. But then when you give that genealogy in the book of Ruth, now you make him a Moabite. Okay, that's fine. We have evidence that when he was on the run, he took his family back to Moab. He sided with the Philistines. He was a general. So it becomes very difficult. Is this guy, which side is he? Is he Israel? Or is he with the Philistines? Well, it depends on who's reading, who's looking at it. But this is what we have. We don't have his genealogy in the book of First Samuel. We don't have it in the book of Second Samuel. We don't have it in First Kings. We don't have it in Second Kings. We have it in the book of Ruth, which would be an apologetic work trying to answer these challenges, trying to answer, these things that will be brought or was brought against. Like we said, they don't have any part in the son of Jesse. Any questions, contributions here before we move on?
Bye.
Mr. Jason.
I'm sorry. It's interesting that it's not in the book of Kings and things of that nature, because wouldn't the book of Kings be considered, you know how like other nations have like the annals of the king, such and such? Wouldn't the book of Kings be considered that? So his lineage would need to be in the annals of the kings, but it's in like an outside work. So that would be, I can see why this would be problematic, because his recognition is not in the book of the kings, whereas all the other kings have recognition in the book.
Correct.
Part of that answer is that Jesse being the 10th would actually be the first one, because the other 9, because of the kinsman redeemer, go to the person that died. They're his sons. That answers part of it. But my question is, could Jesse have done something? And that's the reason why, something I don't know about in history, and that's the reason why they're more concerned about Jesse than David?
No, so they'll be concerned about Jesse because he's the one that determines where David comes from. So, like, who is your father? Pretty much. That's the question. So, that's why they focus. That's why they say his father's name, because that determines his lineage.
You were telling us a while back about the history behind Jesse and his mom and all of that. There was a question whether or not Jesse was a Hebrew or he was something else.
Correct. So Jesse. I don't think I ever mentioned Jesse. I've mentioned about David.
Okay.
David's mother. She was an outcast, etc. But no, I don't think I've
Yes, that's the story that I was referring
correct.
to. Yes, it was about David.
Yes. So now that is looking at the text from a theological perspective. From the theological perspective, so for example, the book of Ruth concedes that David's mother is a Moabite. Okay. Now, the Hebrew text says that no Moabite should be part of the lineage or part of Israel until the 10th generation. Okay. Now, the argument, because the book of Ruth, based on the genealogy, would pose a problem for that command that we find in the Torah. So to solve that problem, now we say that, well, since the text says Moabite, it means the men. It doesn't say Moabites, that would be the women. So that is how it has been resolved. Traditionally, that's how it's been resolved. The reason for resolving it that way is because we concede to the fact that what is happening in the book of Ruth contradicts or goes against what the Torah says about the Moabites coming into Israel. If Jesse was the 10th generation, they would not come up with that tradition. But because possibly he's not, that is why that tradition tries to get out of the difficulty by saying that it was the women that it was the men that were forbidden, not the women.
Hey, Rabbi,
Mr.
is
David.
there any who's Perez? Is there any history on where he came from or who he is, being that they're using him in the Book of Ruth to tie him to David?
Yes, I kept quiet about that. I'll tackle that next week. That's why I didn't mention the genealogy. We'll find out why it has to go to Perez, and not even Perez by such, because Perez goes to Judah, you know, but Nashon as well. Amminadab begat Nashon, so we'll look at that as well. Yes, so Perez is tied to Judah. So to make that link, you have to go to Perez.
I have one question. In regards, didn't the Israelites take over the Isles of Moab, which became an Israelite territory? And is it Ruth from the Isles of Moab? That was the territory that they took when they went into Canaan, which made that the Isles of Moab, which is listed in the Old Testament, which means that it's not a Moab territory anymore. It became an Israelite territory. And isn't this where Ruth is from, the Isles of Moab, which makes her not a Moabite but an Israelite?
People have argued that, but no, it's they're arguing, and when it says "My God will be your God," they are arguing that is the judges, but you have a difficulty with that. If Ruth was an Israelite, that statement would not make sense. When you say "My God will be your God," your people will be my people. Um, what is she saying?
Right, right. And I thought that was based on because each judge in each territory had their own almost Israelite set of rules that was different from the other judge. So at a certain point, like one judge would judge this way compared to a judge in Judah.
I was thinking when we say judge, are we talking about the Shoftims, like Deborah?
No, no, just the judges. That's where when Israel didn't have kings, each one had judges, right? Each 12 tribes had their own
Okay, so
judges in
the
there.
yeah, I'll call them elders. I won't call them judges. I would call them because the word judge Shoftim there is they're rebel leaders. They don't judge in the sense of yeah, sure, yes. I've heard that argument. Um, but I think it's another way out to make the Moabite narrative go away.
Rabbi, is this is the only way to prove this lineage idea that's going on now is theologically, right?
Correct.
Because
Yes. Hmm.
there I don't see how like historically or naturally we can be able to make David lineage come from that of Israel. And it would make sense that after that, him and Solomon died, that the kingdoms broke apart. It makes perfect sense because of us not having a part in Jesse. It makes now that you say that, it makes perfect sense as to why they separated and went and did their own thing if they were ever together. So like
Correct. Correct.
it makes perfect sense.
Yes, because we should know that David was only after the death of Saul. What people don't know is that David just did not take over from Saul right away. No, he was only the leader for the territory of Judah for 7 years. Now the north came to an agreement with him, a covenant with him, for him to rule over the south and then the north. And then when things did not go well, that's why they were able to split up. So for 7 years, Ishbaal was ruling over the other territories. A lot of people don't recognize that, they don't know that, or they haven't paid attention to that. But it wasn't just a smooth transition, you know.
Um, any could you confirm or deny this? that Ruth and her sister were actually princesses, daughters of the king when they got conquered?
When who got conquered? Yo, there's a tradition that um what's it? Ruth and Orpah were princesses, correct? There's a tradition that says that. Okay, let's move on, and then we'll bring everything together. Um, with the two traditions, when it comes to the lineage of David, we have two traditions. We have tradition I call B and A. Tradition B, which is slightly earlier than tradition A. 1 Samuel 16 is tradition B. It's earlier than tradition A. When it talks about David, it doesn't associate him with Judah. It says, "Behold, I saw a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite." That's tradition B. What I'll call it tradition B, which is earlier than tradition A. The B source does not identify David with Judah. The A source does. It calls him, David was the son of a certain Ephratah of Bethlehem in Judah. It means that when he was born an Ephratah, Bethlehem Ephratah, in the territory of Judah. What is wrong with that statement? Does anyone know?
It's not claiming him to be a Judite though. It's just saying that he was in that territory of Judah.
The territory of Judah, okay, awesome. Anyone else has anything
The
to
place
say?
didn't exist yet as such, right?
Correct. There was no tribe of Judah at the time of David's birth. What do you mean, Judah? David's birth, and perhaps for the good part of his career, scholars have long argued on the basis of the text alone that the tribe of Judah did not exist before the 10th century. What do you mean, Judah? It wasn't existent yet. Like I said, it was a Jebusite city when David was born. It wasn't an Israelite city. So how are you associating Judah to the place? It's after the fact. You are telling me what came after the fact. But when the guy was born, he was born in Bethlehem. He was born in Jerusalem, the territory of the Jebusites. So you can't tell me Judah. It means the person writing is writing after the fact. When the place has become Judah. Oh, Lord have mercy. Next week, I'm going to prove this statement. You would notice that in the Song of Deborah, the oldest, I think, literature that we have in the Song of Deborah, go read it, Judah is not mentioned.
Moray, but isn't in the Song of Moses he's mentioned?
In the Song of, oh yeah, he's mentioned. He's mentioned even in Genesis. But the Song of Judah predates the account in Genesis because it's written after the fact. The Song of Deborah dates to the time of the judges. They hadn't written Genesis yet. And Deborah tells you the territory. And you will notice that in the south was Benjamin, not Judah. Judah did not come into existence. It was way after
So,
that.
just to be clear, you're saying that Deborah was written before the Song of Moses.
No, the song that Deborah sang predates the writing of the book of Genesis. The song that she sang dates to the time of Deborah. That was when
But
the book of Genesis, the song that Moshe sang, was written after. It's, how do I put it? It's a composition that came later. We cannot put it on the lips of Moshe. Let me say that. We can put this on the lips of Deborah. We cannot put Moshe's song on the lips of Moshe. And as we explained with that song, it was a psalm that was taken. It wasn't like composed by Moshe. It was a psalm that was taken because it spoke to the event at that time. So next week, I would prove what I'm saying about when Judah came into the scene. It would let me go back into how really did the 12 tribes come about? How really did the 12 tribes come about? Is the person writing looking at what happened historically? And then, since Judah has to be the head, the narrative that we read is actually tailored to give the reason why Judah has to be the head. So, in conclusion, I'm not going to be long. I'm just going to give a little bit so we can chew on and then we can turn next week. David's father is of uncertain origin, and opponents of him of David invoke the father's name when heaping scorn on David. His genealogy is suspect. The status of his ancestral hometown is in some doubt because it was under the Jebusites. The text itself concedes on these matters. And these concessions, I should say, are in themselves grounds for suspicion that all is not as it seems in the text. And before David's time, like I said, there is no evidence of an ethnic affiliation of the tribe of Judah to Israel. And this holds the more because we see the effort that the text puts in to affiliate David with Israel. In the first instance, there are the late genealogies, which are artificial. We'll look at it next week. And the second thing is that Samuel never anointed David in public. Saul was anointed in public. David was never anointed in public. It was a private ceremony. By Samuel. So now what we've done is we've looked at the text, we've looked at the history, we've looked at the data that we have available to us, and we've come to these interesting conclusions. Is David Hamalek, David the king, was he Israelite by choice or was he by birth? What really was Saul's issue with him? What really were the northern tribe or the people that Saul, they had allegiance to Saul, what issues did they have with him that they kept saying that we have no share in the son of Jesse? What really is the historical picture here? What is the political picture? We're going to continue next week. Questions, contributions, additions before we close?
I got a couple of questions.
I have a couple of questions. One, wouldn't it be more problematic for Saul to? I mean, not Saul, but
David?
oh God,
Samuel?
no, the Samuel. Wouldn't it have been more problematic for him to have anointed him when he was on the run from Saul all the time? So that would be kind of a problematic for him to be able to anoint him publicly when he couldn't, you know, he was on the run all the time from Saul.
Correct. Well, when he was anointed, he wasn't on the run.
Right.
Yeah, Yah says
I'm
go.
saying publicly, he was on the run because, you know, it's a difference when you're doing it privately versus publicly, you know. Then, you know, in Saul's case, you know, hey, he don't have any choice but to really go after you then because you're trying to publicly embarrass him. So it made it more of a difficult situation for him to do it publicly.
Yeah, yes, you can make that argument, I think. But the reason why it was done privately was because you don't anoint a king when there's one sitting on the throne. You have to dethrone the first person, the king first, or the king has to be banished. The king has to die before you anoint someone else. So that act in of itself is punishable. That's treason. It's punishable by death. That is why Samuel had concerns about going to do it, and he had to do it in private. It never came out publicly that Samuel had anointed him. I don't think so. We, the readers, know that, but no one walking around, you know, would have known or thought that Samuel had poured oil on him.
Just to roll back to the when we were talking about the Jebusite stuff, it's interesting because actually the Yoruba, Jebus is actually associated with the Yoruba people, that name. And also that's north of your tribe area, your tribal area. There's a place near Gago called Lamlem, which is interesting. So I'm wondering if that could be associated with the, you know, the Lemu, the Lemmy type of, you know, the God that you were talking before. So that's quite interesting as well.
Yes, I think I've heard some people in Nigeria say that they come from the Jebusites. Yes, I have heard that. So you may have. I didn't know that the lamb. They also have the lamb, the deity. That's interesting.
Yes, it's a location that's north of there near Gago. That land near Gago is called, in the ancient, on the ancient slave map, is called the land of Lamlem.
Oh, okay. That's good. That's interesting.
Mr. Dollar, they were the people of Lamland were Jews as well too. Rabbi,
Yes.
I have a quick question, right? This is it's all starting to make sense. In a sense that, and so outside, so we take this outside of the text, right? And we look at like ancient Near Eastern literature, things of that nature. Whenever the Assyrians never associated the southern kingdom with the northern kingdom, neither did the Babylonians. So like the northern kingdom was its own kingdom, but they associated the southern kingdom with Hamath. They didn't associate them with the northern kingdom. So like the Judah and stuff like that was associated with the king of like Hamath and things of that nature. So when you look at that, Hamath was a Jebusite city. It was in the land of the Jebusites. So even the Babylonians was associating the kingdom of Judah, not with the northern kingdom of Israel, but with the what had come at that time as the Hamathians and things of that nature. But they were from the Jebusite city. They wasn't from the northern kingdom. So that's crazy.
Correct. Because you make a good point. Because there are debates that there was not a united monarchy as it's been pushed. Both sides have very strong points. The reason is because the extra biblical sources, they mention the north. They also do mention the south, but they don't mention them as one. And the north was more prominent. The north, the religion of Israel was from the north. That was the authentic one. That's why when they split with the south, when they localized everything, or they centralized everything to Jerusalem, and there was a split, what they did was they put back their ancestral worships. They put back their altars and all of that in the north, because that's the true Israelite religion. What you had in the south were reforms. And then it would it's all going to come together next week. Why? What's his name? David has had to choose Jerusalem as the city of David. It's like he's going home.
Thank you, Jake.
The Jebusite.
Jason, you just opened my eyes up to something I didn't realize before, because it only makes sense. Well, if I'm at war with a country, I'm at war with a whole country. I'm not just attacking the north part and I leave the southern portion not attacked. So, that just opened my eyes to something I didn't realize before.
Yeah, because they wasn't seen, and when I was looking at that, they wasn't seen as together. That's why when they took the north, they didn't take the south, because Assyria could have took the south as well too, but they wasn't seen as the same. So you have like these later traditions and things of that nature. It's just interesting. I'm just giving this information out there. It's very interesting to see how when we come to the text, see, we reading the text now, rabbis pointing this stuff out. We would have never known this, right? But then when you take it and you look at it in history, it makes sense, because the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, like even when the Assyrians were attacking and stuff like that, like there was a major battle of Karkar, right? Where Israel, northern kingdom, went up. They had all these chariots and things of that nature, and they fought off the Assyrians. That's nowhere in the Bible. You don't see it nowhere in the text, right? But this was a major historical battle that we know is true, and it happened. But you don't see that. So like, it's just crazy when you look at it from both perspectives, how you can see what is taking place here. But the southern kingdom wasn't associated, which is why all the northern kings were bad, right? and the line of the Lord of this Mashiach is supposed to come through the southern kingdom. Makes perfect sense.
But see, this makes it all problematic then, because everybody's waiting for, oh, y'all gonna get back together and be one. There's a problem if they were never really one in the first place.
That's very true. That's very true. Before the questions go on, for what we've discussed today, is there anything that somebody needs clarification on? Is there any questions, anything that is not clear for me to clarify? I want to give people the opportunity. Yes, go ahead, Mr. David.
Yeah, that Judah situation that you brought up, can you either go over that again, or can you explain it, where you stated that? Are you saying that at the time that David was born, Judah wasn't in control of Bethlehem, or Judah wasn't even one of the 12 tribes altogether? Like, I got confused when you were going over that point.
Correct. So when he was born in the Jebusite city, it wasn't called Judah. It wasn't a Judah territory. No. It was a Jebusite territory. So Judah, the tribe of Judah is there, but the territory wasn't theirs.
Oh, okay. So it's not the tribe we were questioning. We were just questioning. Okay, I got you.
Correct.
All right, I cleared it up.
They were not in charge of that territory. Judah was information. It wasn't set as the 10 tribes. These were, like I said, the 10 tribes were more prominent than those in the south. And we'll look at that in details. I'm going to argue next week that the tribes came originally from the land of Canaan. I'll argue that, and I'll give you the data and the historical fact.
I have a question. It was either last week or earlier at the beginning. It was about when David's son died. There's the verse, 2 Samuel 12:13. But it says this, but why should I fast when he is dead? Can I bring him back again? I will go to him one day, but he cannot return to me. Now, is that referring to the grave or is that referring to what we would call heaven?
Will be the grave. Yeah, at that time it would be the grave.
Rabbi,
Madam Susanette.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
Back to the genealogy. To me, it always seemed that when Samuel came to Jesse, I don't remember the exact time. It always seemed to me that Jesse seemed surprised that Samuel came to him to anoint one of his sons. Could this be partly because of what you were discussing about the genealogy? And why didn't he think of his other son? Why did Samuel have to ask him if he had another son? Why didn't he include David?
Yes, because when you're going to anoint a king, you want a king who is a warrior. You want a king who can fight. You want a king who is tall, who looks good. That was the criteria that the selector saw, according to the text. So when Samuel gets there, he sees Eliab, and he's like, look at him, broad shoulder. And he was part of the army of Saul. So he would have been somebody who's proven himself. But you see, that is one tradition. That is one tradition as to how David comes into the picture. You know, he's a shepherd. He's this harmless person in the field. Okay. So the reason why he wouldn't be naturally, the reason why they wouldn't bring him out, because he doesn't meet the criteria at all. And Samuel also went with the custom that, hey, this is what the king has to look like. And then the text says, yeah, tells him that no, it's none of them. Don't look at their physique. I don't choose kings like that. So in that tradition, Saul was chosen because of his military might, but that is not why David is chosen. But in the other tradition, yes, he's chosen because he was a warrior. He defeated Goliath. So you do have a point. Maybe that may have been the surprise on with Jesse when Samuel comes and chooses him. It would have been a surprise, and he was surprised. He was asking whether everything was okay, because when Samuel comes in town, he's not coming because of good news. He's going to rebuke someone.
Did Samuel travel by himself?
Yes, he did. According to him, he did. He didn't even take a donkey that he was supposed to use, but he just walked, I think.
Another question for me. Let's say Jan was spoke to Nathan. Why they choose David? Because if we put the story this way, we have Nathan that want to make a king, take the power from Saul.
Repeat that again.
Sorry?
Repeat that again. There's an echo. I want to hear you clearly before I try to answer.
Yeah. So I was saying, like, we are not sure that Yah really spoke to Nathan, right? That's our story, but let's say he didn't spoke to Nathan.
Okay.
I want to see like the political story when I take Yah out of the picture. We have Nathan that wants to take the power from Saul, and that goes to find another, let's say, king. Why choose David then?
Yes, so you want, because that is what happened.
Samuel, sorry, Samuel.
Yes, okay, go land and then I'll come in. Sorry.
Yeah. I said Samuel going to find a king because he wanted to take power from Saul. Why choose David as a king then? Because he didn't meet the criteria, right?
Yes, he didn't make the correct. So the author or the person redacting or the person putting it together has a tradition that um, this is the reason why Saul was chosen. It's not the same reason why David was chosen. David was chosen for other reasons. See, he's taken care of the sheep. He comes from humble beginnings. All the good stories that brings, whatever the goal was. Historically, like I said, David was a general. He commanded his own army. If you want somebody to fight against your enemies, being he's the one that you would pick. He defended the tribe of Judah. He went to war against some of Israel's enemies. So if you want somebody who's going to protect you, yeah, he's the ideal king. See, but it wasn't everybody who accepted him like that, you know. And for him to actually get closer to the throne that Ishbaal, Saul's son, took over, he had to murder all of them. So it's all political. But when we come to Nathan, we have an issue. I'm going to put something on the screen for you. Let's read 2 Samuel 7. Let's see if I can make this big. 2 Samuel 7. When the king was settled in his palace, and Yudhevav had granted him safety from all the enemies around him, the king said to the prophet Nathan, "Here I am dwelling in the house of cedar, while the ark of Yudhevav abides in the tent." So David wants to build a dwelling for Yah. Look at what Nathan says. Nathan said to the king, "Go and do whatever you have in mind, for Yudhevav is with you." Pause. Is Nathan? How should I put the question? Where did Nathan get this instruction from? He's the court prophet. Is as a court prophet, you only speak what you're told to speak. But yeah, we don't want your suggestions. We don't want your opinions. We don't want anything. Did Yah say it? No. Because verses 4 tells us, "But that same night, the word of Yah came to Nathan. Go and say to my servant David, that says Yudhevav, you are the one to build a house, sorry, are you the one to build a house for me to dwell in? For the day I brought the people of Israel out of Egypt to this land, I have not dwelt in a house, but have moved about in tent and tabernacle. As I moved about wherever the Israelites went, did I ever reproach any of the tribal leaders whom I appointed to care for my people? Why have you not built me a house of cedar? Further, say thus to my servant David. Thus says Yudhevav of host. I took you from pasture, blah, 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 all of this stuff. No. And then it comes and it says, no, you want to build me a house, but I'm going to turn around and build you a house. Wait a second. Please, Nathan, wait a second. What's going on here? So it gets a little problematic. The guy wants to build a house for Yah. The prophet says, go ahead. And the prophet has to come back and say, sorry. So the first time you spoke, who is speaking? Now it makes me question everything that you're going to say afterwards. It makes it extremely difficult. Because sometimes you speak on your own accord. Sometimes you speak when you ask tells you to speak. When do I know? Which is which? And I'm being like I said, because I'm Hebrew doesn't mean that I'm going to just rock with the text. No, it has to make sense. That's how we study. Who is writing? What are their biases? What positions do they hold theologically? What are they trying to push? We have to find out so that we don't lead or we don't follow just because it's written in the text. So because he wants to build a house, now it's changed that I'm going to build a house for you forever. This is where the covenant that was made with David comes into play. Even if he makes a mistake, he shall build a house for my name and I'll establish his royal throne forever. It comes out of this conversation. Out of the conversation of I want to build you a house. So now for now you cannot challenge David's origins because there's a covenant forever. That is why when the North split, they accused them of being disloyal. Was that really the case? It's political. We've read it as a religious book, and we've forgotten that we're talking about real people. We're talking about kingdoms. We're talking about betrayal. We're talking about politics, all of that. And we have to take time to read it as such. Otherwise, we will miss all these details.
The Northern Kingdom, when they split and they went into exile, did they still have kings? A, and if so, were the kings from the line of David?
Yes. So usually when they take you into exile, they take your kings with you. Sometimes they kill your kings, and then you take their aristocrats with you, and then you leave the poor people. So that is what happened to both North and South. Where the kings ended up, that's where the northern tribes, that's where our customs and our traditions, this our history, that's how we narrate it. So yes, maybe they did, maybe they did not. But with the South, we know that the king was taken into exile. He did not come back. They returned without a king, and that's where the concept of a Mashiach is going to come. A Mashiach in a form was to sit on the throne of David because they returned without a king.
Rabbi, I know I'd asked this once before, but just to refresh my memory in light of what's going on now, from a historical standpoint, what king can we point to and say, look, here's history. He existed when dealing with the South? Because if we're going to question David, we might as well just line everybody up and start taking attendance, like taking historical attendance. So looking at the Southern Kingdom, what king can we start at by saying, all right, this guy was a real person?
Mr. Jason, I'll need your help here.
Hezekiah would be one.
Yes,
Yeah,
there's one before
king of
Hezekiah. There's one before Hezekiah. Oh.
Yeah, wouldn't Hezekiah be the last king?
No, Hezekiah, and then there was the one before Hezekiah. Oh, I'm pulling a blank. There's one. Where's Mr. Jason? The Josiah made reforms. So Hezekiah first. You have Josiah, but there's one before Hezekiah. There's one before Hezekiah. I forgot his name, but that's where we start from. Where they appear in extra biblical sources. Yes. We don't have David. We don't have Solomon. we start with the king before Hezekiah. I forgot his name.
And with these kings that could be identified in history, there's no reference or tie to them to David at all.
The house of David. They tie them to the
Okay.
house. Yeah, I think there's the house of David that is mentioned. So historically, we have David mentioned, but it's the house of David on the, I think it's the Mesha Stele. Yes, it calls the Ariel. The word uses Ariel, and then we have to find out what that is. But it's interpreted as the house of David with an H at the back of the is D. Sometimes it's spelled DWDH or DDH. No, so let me get you.
And these kings that are referenced are accepted Israelites. There's no question about their genealogy, no?
Oh yes, yes, they put them in the south, correct?
Okay. All right. We'll see how this goes
Omri,
next
yes,
week.
yes. But when we go to
Rabbi,
the north they are attested. There's a long list of northern kings because the north changed kings back to back. But there's a long list of northern kings attested in extra biblical sources than the south. So that's why we say the South became prominent, we think, and I agree with that hypothesis, was when the North went into exile. That is only when the South became, or when the Assyrians came, yes, that's when the South became the it or the focus. But the North had always been the, should I say, the superpower. Was it Madame Deborah?
so
Somebody wanted
Rabbi,
to say something. Yes, go ahead, Madame Pamela.
so the North left and went into sub-Saharan Africa. That's my understanding. And so I've been scouring maps, right, trying to figure out where they may have gone. And I have a map that has a town or village called Judah, right? And that's kind of next to Benin, Togo, Ghana, along that area. So when the North left Israel, I know they took a path, and I know that you're going to do a movie about that.
Yes.
But based on your own understanding, when would the South have made it into sub-Saharan Africa? Was that after the 10 tribes left? Because there are names of places on the maps that I'm looking for that come from the southern part of Israel. So did they come after the 10 tribes? Did they migrate with the 10 tribes? Do you have any understanding of that?
Correct. So when it comes to the migration, the traditions are such. There are some people who migrated when the Israelites left out of Egypt. They went to Ethiopia and then they went to the coast of West Africa. So that was the earlier migrations. Um, the Ga people that I belong to have one of those traditions, where some of the Ga people migrated to Ethiopia because they had married Ethiopian wives, so they migrated there with their wives when the Exodus happened. So that's the first tradition. We have another tradition of a migration when the Assyrians sent the north into exile, and then you have the 70 AD migration as well. So these are the three stages of the migration as the tradition is told from those on the African continent.
But yet Judah and the Benjamites would have stayed in the south. But when I look at maps, I see the tribe of Judah in sub-Saharan Africa. I see the Benjamites in Guinea-Bissau. So during the Assyrian captivity and migration, did parts of the South leave with the 10 tribes? That's where I don't understand why we keep having this disconnect.
No, they could have
Maybe they
gone.
left
They could have gone
when,
after in 70 A.D. They wouldn't have to go with the northern tribe when the Assyrians came.
okay, so maybe after the Babylonian exile,
Correct.
around
Yes.
that time, you're saying they probably went to sub-Saharan Africa?
Correct.
Okay,
Yes. Yes.
all right.
It could be after.
Madam Pamela,
let me
to help you out, there's a writing. I'm sorry, Rabbi.
No problem. I was going to say that Judah, where you're saying Judah is not Judah, is Weda. It's not Judah with the J, it's Weda. So it's kind of a different writing
Okay.
or whatever. Yes,
Right, okay. The map that I have, it just says, I'm gonna go look at it again, because maybe my eyes are playing with me, but I thought it said Judah.
Judah,
But
yes,
there
that's
were
how
probably
they
no
write.
J's, right?
Yeah, that's how they write. They will write it, but it's not. That's how not the people call the place. Is Weda. So okay, Mr. Jason.
I know which map she's talking about. That map does have Judah on it. It's Juda. It says the Judah Kingdom. That's the Dahomey map.
The Dahomey, correct. The territory of Dahomey, yeah. Mr. Jason, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say that in the Jewish writings, the rabbis discussed what happened with the tribes, the 10 tribes, and they verified that second account about them leaving and going into Ethiopia after Sennacherib ran them out of the Middle East. Well, not Middle East. I don't want to say that's pretty bad, but after the Assyrians captured it, it does say that they went into Ethiopia and then went across a couple other mountains. So you would see them migrating towards the east as well. And I think sometimes we look at it, this is before 70 AD. I mean, this is like 722 AD. I mean, BC, 722 BC. But we see that, I think, Rabbi, we look at this stuff as monoliths. Like, there's a mixture of people moving at a time. It's not just one set people.
Correct.
So you might have people, because the north and southern kingdoms are on the border. So if they get rid of the southern kingdom and you have northern people that's living there, that northern, that's living in the southern kingdom that's living in the northern kingdom, they may move, they may migrate too. So I don't think we want to look at it as a monolith, like all the north did this and all, because we know that some of the north did go into the southern kingdoms. We know that some southern kingdoms went north, so it's not like when they came and took over, they demolished everything and every single person left. That's not correct. It's just a group of people from that kingdom that migrated out of there and went through Ethiopia, and those where we continue to get those traditions from today.
Correct. When the north was taken, there was a huge migration from people from the north to the south. So it wasn't like every single person. So you have that mixture. That is when they think that the core of Deuteronomy was brought from the north to the south. That is how they explain the source of the book of Deuteronomy. That was found by the priests in the time of Josiah.
Yeah, that's so true, because it's just like today. I guess that's always been the case. Anytime your parents tell you not to hang out with somebody, you find yourself hanging out with them, no matter what your parents say. So just because they told you to stick to one tribe, the tribes intermingled. Everybody was always intermingling.
Awesome.
Yeah, and just to help you guys out too, we have to take out, like, when you're looking at this stuff and you're going back in history, you got to take your mind back as well, because the ancient people had no idea of racism. So how we view race would have been, they would have laughed at it. It was nonsensical to them. It didn't exist. So you had what you call tribal mixing. That racism did not exist. So in the Bible, they was not walking around like, hey, yo, you Judah, you black, come on over here. That stuff did not exist. You could be white and be from Judah. You could be black and be from Judah. You could be a turtle and be from Judah. Like, it did not exist the way that it does now. So I think that's another thing that we run into as well, is we try to think of the Bible in our current modern context, and that's why we struggle so much. It didn't exist like this. So what you'll see is you'll have many different people that come in and stay in Judah. If you stayed within the region of Judah, you could be considered a Judean, right? It wasn't until these elite rabbis and stuff came back and started distinguishing bloodline. But the people on the ground in Judah did not see themselves that way. If you were in Judah, you stayed that way. Or if not, you would say, hey, I'm Effie from the tribe of such and such over here, right? That's how they viewed themselves. They were more tribal and not so much its skin tone. And they didn't live in, they were not monolithic. Like, they went everywhere. You have Hebrews who are in Asia Minor right now. You have Hebrews who are in China. Like, they traveled. They wasn't just in one place. So what you'll see is coming forward now, and this is why a lot of the Jews and a lot of the leaders in Jerusalem have been going out to these places. They're trying to figure out what's going on, because Jews, as they say, are popping up everywhere. But that's because when the Assyrians came in, mostly during that area, and then the Babylonian area, and they attacked, they took you from your homeland. So you're dispersed, you're everywhere. You're not nowhere near where you used to be at. So you're going to find these people everywhere. So you can't look at a skin color and try to determine who is Judah and who is not. That would be crazy for us to do that today, because there was so much mixing and stuff going on.
Awesome. Any other questions? Anything anyone needs clarification on?
Yeah, I just got a question to Jason. Do you happen to have Dana Marinici's book?
These things as well. Her point of view is that, like Egypt and stuff like that, the reason why we can't find Moses in Egypt is because the Egypt that the Bible is talking about is in southern Arabia. So she does go into these things. She has some, really good pointers and things of that nature as well. But I don't have her book. Her book's like $300. I can't afford that, so I don't have a book right now.
I can't even find anywhere to buy it now. Even if you want to buy it, it's like they. And she said it's supposed to be a book
No,
that's
go to
supposed
her
to be.
page. Go to her Facebook page, and she has a link on there and stuff like that where you can buy it. But she is phenomenal, though. She's very phenomenal. Absolutely.
That's what I'm saying. We're thinking the most things that we have today are the actual. And I try to, if I live 5,000 years,
One at a time. Mr. D or Mr. Dalet? One at a time. Mr.
Yeah,
Mr. Dalet, go ahead.
I try to tell people that if I live 5,000 years in the future and I don't know what a supermarket is, I go and dig up in a spot where the supermarket used to be, and I find thousands of boxes of Pop-Tarts. I think Pop-Tarts originated there. No, Pop-Tarts didn't originate there. So just because I find something somewhere doesn't mean that's the origin of its location.
Yeah, what I wanted to say about is that you can find her on academia. You could also request her book if you'd like.
Okay, thank you.
Rabbi, somebody asked this. They asked a question in the chat about. Ebony said, so the Ethiopians went to Europe or the other way around. And just to answer that, Ebony, yes, they did. They went around different places and things of that nature. But what we got to understand about ancient times is this too, right? if the Assyrians came and took you from Israel, you couldn't just say, well, I don't like where they placed me, I'm going back. It didn't work that way. I don't think we understand that. Like nowadays, if you don't like America, you can get up and go, right? You could go to Brazil, you could go anywhere you want to go. In ancient times, it didn't work like that. When you were captured and you went somewhere, you couldn't just get up and leave. So like you're gonna find these people all over the place. That's why people are like, well, what, could there be European Hebrews? Yes, there can. If they exiled them to Europe, they wasn't coming back over here. It didn't work that way. So that's another pointer just to help us all out that we got to understand. In ancient times, when they took you from a land, you couldn't get up and just go back to the land you wanted to. You had to A, wait till that king was deceased, and B, hope the next king would allow you to be able to go back, or they was overthrown by somebody that would allow you to go back. That's why our text writes and speaks so highly of Cyrus. Because why? They couldn't just get back up and go back to Israel. They had already put a whole different group of people in Israel. So you'll see this mixing and things of that nature. So once again, we got to make sure that we have that lens on when we're looking.
Okay, Mr. David, I'm writing this thing for you per your question. The first king, I just looked here on my notes. The first king in the south that was mentioned was Amaziah, sorry. Let me write it out for you here. Amaziah, son of Jehoram. And you see it on the Tel Dan Stele. Where is it? Where is it? Here, let me share that. So historically, he's the first person mentioned in the south. I hope you can. And you see it on the Tel Dan Stele. He's mentioned as from the house of David. And then you have Jero. Let me write them out here. Yeah, where is it? There we go. Then you have Jotham. Yeah. So I'll send a link that you can check this thing from. Yeah. But it says he's from the house of David. It doesn't say that much, So hope that helps. There's the first person mentioned from the south and the kings where he's attested outside of our text. Anything anyone needs clarity on? How has what I've presented affected you? Are you surprised? Are you confused? Are you putting things together in your head? Does it make sense? Do you disagree? We're not offended if you do. So, yes, I mean.
Oh, Rabbi,
Madam Pamela Jane.
I think I agree, not with the presentation and the information that you imparted. I am just, and I don't know if it's theology or not, I just have a hard time separating David from Hebrew Israelites. I'm not there. I don't know. I'm gonna have to read some independent information.
Definitely.
And I'm hoping that someone can point me to some. I just can't unlearn or unknow what I believe I know at the moment. So please keep talking about this subject and bringing forth facts that we can grow from. Thank you.
You're very, very, very welcome. Very welcome. Yes, I'll keep talking about it. I'll keep giving you more data so we can look at it. No problem at all. Anyone else?
It's the dogma. How do we get rid of the dogma? I think most of us is stuck in a dogmatic trance because we believed the stuff like the Messiah coming, the line of David, the son of Jesse, like all these dogmatic things. So it's like, how do you rebound from that? Like, how do you just, come back from that depth of trance? It's like being woken up out of a trance and you realizing the world is not what you thought it was.
Yeah.
Jason, I just want to add to Jason. What I picked up about Ruth was actually from Rabbi's courses. So when I went into that study, I wasn't. It wasn't that I was carrying a lot of baggage with me, but when I took the course and went back and tried to do the lineage, it made sense to me. So now trying to undo it it's just going to take a minute if I decide that I want to undo it. So it's not confusing as much as there's just some more information that has to be processed. So I'm looking forward to it now. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. Anyone else? Anything you want to say?
Well, I already figured it out about, it didn't do anything to me because I already pretty much understood about David, so I'm not really surprised. I was already saying that he was kind of clumsy in the first place. So, but being that that there is other external historical stuff that does talk about him, so he has to be who he is because there's other stuff that does mention him and talk about his lineage. So.
Rabbi, you did say something a few weeks ago. I don't think we got into it, but you made mention that there was the Babylonians was taunting Israel, and they was asking them, "Well, where is Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh? Where's your God at?" And you said that you was gonna show us that. I wanted to know where could we grab that information from? I tried to find it, but I can't find it.
Remind me again.
It was one of the Babylonian kings. They was coming over the I forgot what it was, but we were gonna do it when we was talking about I forgot what lecture it was. And then we got off. We went to another position, but it was one of the kings. They had wrote about one of the outside kings, the Babylonian kings. They wrote about they was taunting Israel pretty much like, taunting Judah like, where's your deity at now? How are you gonna be able to? It was just I can't remember the exact name of the king, but I know you said you was gonna talk about that.
Oh. I have to go listen to it again and see. Yeah, I have to go listen to it and see. Yes. Please go ahead. Somebody wanted to say something? Putting this here for us. It's Manningham like that. Yeah. Pekah. And then you have the fall to Syria here. So if you look at the northern kings, you look at the northern kings compared to the south, you see these are all the northern kings that they are tested outside of the Bible. Let me change this so that you have yes, so to your right, you will see the northern kings, and then that are tested outside of the biblical record. And then to your left, that is the kings of the south that are tested biblical records. You see the difference. You see the north is more, you have the north, and like the north is tested first. The northern kings that you have house of Omri, so he's mentioned. Awesome. Okay, so let me state again. What we just looked at, we've looked at the text from a historical, nothing theological. If you're looking at it from the theological perspective, none of this matters. David is an Israelite. David is from the tribe of Judah. Bethlehem is Bethlehem. Jerusalem is house of bread. All of that. We're just going with what the text is telling us. We're reading it as, from a faith point of view, from a theological point of view. But now we have another perspective that we can look at the text from legitimately, from the historical perspective, because we have extra biblical data that speaks to what the Bible is speaking to. So when we go outside of the text and now we're not looking at it from a theological lens, the text reads differently. And it makes us now point out, so now we come and say, okay, this place wasn't called such at the time of David. Okay, can we look into the text and see, hints of this? And then we saw, they're questioning his lineage. They're asking the son of Jesse, they don't want to be associated with him. So what's going on? When he was born, was there Judah? No, he was born in the Jebusite city. The chief patron deity is Salim, and we see it in the name of his children. Then again, you can read Absalom as my father is peace, as because that's what it would mean in Hebrew. But as Absalim, my father is the patron deity of Salim. Shlomo, his name is he gets a throne name Jedidiah from Nathan because why give him that name? Well, he's named after the Jebusite patron deity, Salim. So when we look at all these things, we see that the narrative begins to change. Now we get more data. Now we can kind of figure out why Saul was behaving, why he was behaving. And then we can figure out what scholars mean when now people are challenging or they're questioning the lineage of David, and they are asking, is this person who the text really says he is? If we look at it from a political perspective, if we look at it from a historical perspective, do we get the same picture as the text is painting? And maybe not. Maybe not. Okay. Awesome. Anything else before we call it a day? Next week we'll continue from where we've stopped. We'll look at the emergence of the 12 tribes. With this said, how did they come? How were they formed? How did they come together? We would look at it as we continue our series from the something of Babylon, by the rivers of Babylon. You see how everything came to be. And I hope it brings some clarity. Anything else? I want to also thank you for making the class go smoothly. I think going forward, we're going to do just that, so that we can cover what needs to be covered. Thank you all for your patience and understanding as well. Any last words from anyone before we call it a Shabbat? Okay. I'm hoping that you would take time to go over this, check everything that I have said. If you have friends, colleagues who are teachers, run it by them. Maybe they haven't seen it from this perspective. And then bring some questions next week so that we can answer them. If you're on if you're on YouTube or social media and listening to this, we are not going to be broadcasting next week. We're going to go back into our private sessions. So if you want to join us, not just visit the link, kingdomofkings.org, and you can sign up there and join us. This is what we do every Shabbat. Awesome. Okay. And I will say this. Sometimes you find information that goes against everything that you believe. It happens. No. We are raised up to love certain people in the text. It's normal. We are raised up and certain pictures are painted to us. It's normal. But there comes a time when sometimes you run across some data that goes against the picture that's been painted, and you want to research it some more. You research it and you go like, oh wow, I didn't see this. I will change my stance on how this is painted. Some people will see the same information and they will just brush it off. Everybody and how they take information. Everything I've said here is not to let you lose faith. It's not to let you throw the Bible away. What I am doing is actually showing you how this thing is written so that what you've chosen to believe will be on the basis of facts. You have factual data that should strengthen your belief. Yes, it's difficult. You may question everything that you believe. You may come to the point where you just want to throw away the book and say, I'm going to walk away. It's happened. I've seen it happen so many times. Even when I was in school, I have people walking out of class because it goes against everything that they have grown up to believe. But there's a saying that when you hear someone say something, give them an ear, hear them out, because they may say something that may change your life forever, or it would help you grow. So you may not on Facebook, you may not agree with anything that I've said. That is okay, but that is how learning has to be done. Sometimes give you an edge so that you check your foundation. Is it solid or is it weak? Also, you've had this point of view, so when you run into somebody who comes at you from this point of view, is not foreign to you. You can have an intellectual discussion and say, yes, I've heard this. This is my opinion on it. This is what I submit to, etc. At least you've heard it from a source that is not saying it to debunk or to throw down the book, but to say that, hey, look at this. Look at this. It may be saying something else. It may be really saying something else. So I thank you for your patience. I really do. And I thank you for bearing with me. I take my hats off for you, because to listen to some of these things that I say, it's like, Rabbi. But It is necessary. So may Yah bless us all. May Yah keep us. May Yah shine his face upon us. And may he give us peace. Enjoy the rest of your Shabbat. Enjoy the rest of the week. Next week, if Yah gives us life, we will continue where we stopped from. Shabbat Shalom, Israel. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom, Rabbi.
Shabbat Shalom, Mr. Jew.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you. Shabbat shalom.
You're very welcome, Madam Ebony. Shabbat Shalom to you.